Welcome to the Business of Property podcast. I'm Stuart.
And I'm Simon.
We're both property people running our own businesses, and this podcast is just us chatting, as we do every week, about anything and everything property. And this week, top of mind is fraud. And not us, we're not thinking about committing fraud, but there's been a fair amount in the last week or so about property people committing fraud. Simon, would you like to kick us off with a little overview of what's on our minds?
Oh, I don't know if I can manage to sum it all up, but I'll try and get the conversation started at least. I've been aware of, or I've seen recently, I think 3 business people. I'll call them business people. I'm not quite sure whether they should be, but we'll
that's a
call them
stretch.
business people who have been involved in fraud and property and have been convicted or gone bust or something along those lines. And we were looking at some of their sort of business practices and thinking that while they were involved in property, really their business was defrauding people. They weren't really doing property as property should be done. So we thought we might sort of look at what they were claiming to do and some of the crazy things. So, for example, one of them was attracting investors with a return of 30%, or a 30% interest on these investments. And that's just a crazy amount of money. And maybe if you're going into a really good BRRRR type deal, did I have too many R's there? Don't know, anyway. You might be looking at a 30% return on investment after you've taken out some money and things. But just for putting in capital to someone else's investment, how on earth can you expect to get 30% back? That's crazy. Have you ever offered your investors 30%, Stuart?
I never offered 30%. And I can say that 10% is the ceiling of what my company has ever offered. And that can sometimes be a stretch and a challenge to meet. And this is the thing. First thing we should say is that if you go to Property Tribes, and we will put the links in the show notes, so just click on those. Simon and I have made a kind of decision that we won't mention the names here just because we'd rather not, and it exists online, so search it there, and we don't have the legal backing to know what we should say or shouldn't say. But given that these people have been found guilty, I'm pretty comfortable that we could, but we'd just rather not. But 30% returns is astronomical by anyone stretching the imagination. And as you say, for me, if you're talking about 30%, really you'll be looking at a development, a refurbishment that generates and adds a lot of value to the building. Now, we know that this particular individual was doing this on a rent-to-rent basis, and Simon and I had a brief discussion before recording about this because, for me, having doing rent-to-rent myself, I know that we're supposed to be solving problems, and I can share a little about that later on in the podcast. But the thing that amazed me as well is that not only was this person offering 30%, but in a 2-year period had paid investors back £3 million. And we also know that this particular individual wasn't paying the landlords. So he wasn't, he was taking rents from tenants, not paying the landlords, and only a certain amount of investors got their money. So that kind of draws you to a conclusion, certainly in my head, and certainly what other people are saying, which I think, and this is where we haven't mentioned names, but for me, this can only be referred to as a Ponzi scheme. Where you're literally taking money from one party and taking some for yourself and then giving it back to another.
Yeah, quite. I mean, while 30% is a crazy interest rate to be offering, the actual amounts of money that the pound values are also crazy. As you say, they paid back £3 million in interest to investors. How much money did they have as investment? I mean, I'm sure that's actually in the articles. In fact, I think I remember reading one, but I can't remember what it was. I mean, it's just crazy amounts of money that these fraudsters have convinced people to give them. And I do worry that not enough people are doing basic due diligence checks on where they put their money. I know some of the people sort of complaining about these people and these schemes going pop are saying they put their life savings into these investments. Why do people think it's a good idea to put big amounts of life-saving money into these schemes?
Well, and I think that's the big issue about why these people could operate in property. They could operate in inverted commas rent to rent, or they can operate in any sector. But what happens is, because of what they've done, so when they've taken £100,000 off Peter and they've given 30% to Paul says, well, this is great. I'm getting 30% on my investment. And then all of a sudden there's proof. There's proof that exists in the world that people are getting this amount. So I can understand how it happens when other people are saying, well, I've given this guy some money and I've got a huge rate of return. But that those dominoes can't keep stacking up. And what we also know about this particular person is that he took £400,000 worth of dividends. And as I was saying to Simon, I operate a rent-to-rent business, and there's a few things that are taken as read as far as I'm concerned. One is that if you've got an agreement, a guaranteed rent agreement, the guaranteed rent bit is a giveaway. Is that the landlord, landlady, the homeowner always gets paid on time every time. That's obviously what should be expected. The other elements are, of course, the compliance of the property and the treatment of the tenants. What has clearly happened here is that the fraudster has done none of these things because, I guess the only thing they did do was put tenants in properties. Whether they did that themselves, I don't know. But they've got tenants in properties and have taken that income and used it for themselves, because they've taken £400,000 worth of dividends. If other investors have seen this person purchasing a Bentley, yet a large amount of investors aren't getting paid, there's a huge amount of red flags going on here. And certainly what we're not saying is that everybody should know, but I think this person's operated for quite some time. And again, we'll point people to Property Tribes, always a great resource to Google people and names to find out what these people are like. And the second person has recently been convicted on 11 counts of fraud. And as of this podcast, the sentencing is not due to the end of May. But again, that's it's a really bad stain for property, isn't it? In terms of the wealth gurus out there.
Yep, exactly. I think we've got to remember that these people are running fraudulent businesses. The fact that they're linking themselves with property and trying to use property as a marketing tactic for their fraud, it is not so much about property and much more just that it's being used in association. Because rent to rent can be done perfectly legitimately, and property investments can be done perfectly legitimately and do work out very well for many, many people. But if you get dodgy people who are intent on, defrauding people, then it will go badly wrong. I thought that, as you mentioned, it's absolutely paramount that people get paid on time. Your landlords get paid on time. And you mentioned a little anecdotal story to me earlier that I thought was quite a good story, because there was one occasion when you slipped up and you didn't pay one of your landlords on time. Do you want to just fill your audience in that little story?
Yes, it was the payment date was due on a weekend, and the short version is that we haven't automated the payments from my banking system because it costs quite a bit of money, and we've got a number of landlords, so it's something that we need to figure out. But given the amounts, typically it's something that we do manually, and we have bills that are created online, and then we do it manually. But on this one occasion, I think the payment was due on a Saturday. So typically we would always pay that on a Friday, as you'd expect. But of course, one thing led to another. Busy Friday, completely forgot. However, what I had done was, for a number of landlords and landladies, we'd arranged hampers to go out to all of them, just because we'd been working with them for at least a year. So I did get, on the Monday, as we were sorting it all out, I did get, quite rightly, by the way, because I'd be exactly the same, a disgruntled homeowner saying, where's our rent payment? This should have been due. But within the hour of that person sending the email, they then received a hamper of lots of wonderful nibbles and lots of stuff. And then they obviously got the payment into the account. So I then very swiftly got a follow-up email saying, thank you so much for this and thank you for the payment. And, so that was the one time I've been late on one property in a year and a half. And it kind of reminded us to sharpen up our systems. But what was quite nice was that we had a complaint, but within an hour of the complaint, it was not only assuaged, but hopefully put us back in more than the good books. But so these things can happen. But yeah, thanks for bringing that up.
I thought it was a lovely story, really. So it's a good one to recount, even though, of course, it starts with being a bit late.
Yes, even though it starts with some of my own ineptitude.
Moving swiftly on. So the rent-to-rent model is being sort of vilified a lot in some of the posts on property tribes, because these fraudsters, I mean, I think from reading around, they don't just do rent-to-rent, but rent-to-rent seems to be a bit of a focus for them in these particular examples. And there are lots of people jumping on this bandwagon saying rent-to-rent isn't a real property strategy. It's only used by people who are trying to do dodgy things. Now, we both know that that's definitely not the case. Rent-to-rent can be a very legitimate and real business. And indeed, there are some traditional letting agents who offer guaranteed rent. And I thought we might talk a little bit about whether guaranteed rent from a letting agent is the same as rent-to-rent, or whether it's not. What do you think, Stuart? Are they the same?
Well, I think in principle they are the same things, because rent-to-rent and what the typically estate agents use, and there've been a couple of estate agents that have used it to really good effect, is it's a guaranteed rental service. So at the highest level, they are offering guaranteed rent to landlords. Now, I think there's a number of differences in between that can happen. Is that some offer guaranteed rent or would pay rent at the start. So there are some agents now that can offer you 6 months or a year's rent on day one for a fee, of course. So they'll take a fee out of that. And I imagine there's lots of other things that they will still pass on as agents. But in principle, what they're offering is a fixed rental service. And then they obviously have the letting agent mechanics to be able to rent. So they've still, and also I think that some of them, there is a secondary sort of service where it is guaranteed rent unless the property's not rented. And this sounds really strange, and this is why I sometimes think it falls flat a bit. Is I know there are some where they will offer a guaranteed rent for a set time, but of course, because they're a letting agent, their primary model is based around obviously filling the property. And I'm just trying to think. I think it's Northwood letting agents that did what I would consider a standard rent-to-rent model, which was just carte blanche. We'll take on your property for a set amount of time. I think the difference from what I've seen, and I haven't reviewed this recently, is that obviously a rent-to-renter typically takes on all cost from the landlord. So gas, electric, broadband, water, you name it, they'll cover it. And I'm not sure whether or not the guaranteed rent models also do that. So the benefit from my perspective is that, you are giving a net figure to the land or the homeowner. It's just easy to say. You're giving a net figure to the homeowner, and that's it. They know that they're covered. They know, so they go, okay, I've got this net figure. Does that cover my mortgage? Typically, they'll carry out the insurance for a number of reasons. But other than that, I know exactly what I'm getting. Versus from estate agents, and again, I might be wrong. And like I say, I haven't looked at them recently, but a guaranteed rent figure might not include all of those things. So they might have a guaranteed rent figure of £1,000, but they still need to deduct, if if it's not a standard letting, if it's not a buy-to-let, they'll still need to deduct things like gas, electric, or all of the above. And something I was sharing with Simon pre-record, and for those sort of listening now, is that what we should all be thinking about in properties is the problems that we solve. And we shared it on last week's episode, like when we're looking at auction properties, they're going to arrive with problems, and it's, do we want to solve the problem? Can I solve the problem? And I met with a homeowner very recently, and I'm not going to talk about the story specifically, but they were not in a great place because standard story of property being mistreated in a very bad way, one of the worst that I've seen, and was just at the end of their tether. And although immediately saying, I want to sell the property, really didn't. It's a property they'd had for a long, long time, actually wanted to hand it down to the kids, but they've got young kids, a few young kids, and just said, I just want the pain to be gone. And that's where this service can come in to its own, because we say, okay, and the way my company works is we're very transparent about what we do. So, okay, this is what your current rent would be. I'm going to take off what I think all of the bills would be, plus a maintenance cost, plus a void allowance. And then this is the net figure I project your property to be. And that's the figure I will commit to giving you for 5 years. And that's as simply as we do it. And, the people that I've worked with, they're usually very happy because they're willing, because they're going to take a lower rent. And that's a given. The rent to renter in my company, for example, what we are primarily doing is taking on risk. So there has to be an exchange for that. And typically, if a rent to renter is doing their job properly, they'll be telling people that, look, I won't make money on this property for several months. It's just how it is, because I'm going to have to invest money, we'll cover costs, and those costs won't get covered. And that's why they're long-term agreements. And again, being upfront with people, most accept that. And when, just going back to the fraudsters, it looks like they were paying people, within months, or offering money very, very quickly. And again, that for me would be a real red flag if someone said, yeah, you're going to get instant returns and so on. But for me, it's about making it a business. And something that you and I spoke about as well, Simon, was about the agreements. So there are certain leasehold agreements. And being honest, I'm sure there's a lot of flaky agreements out there. And we also need to work on the agreements that we have to make sure that they're a bit more watertight, both for the homeowner and for us as the renter and the tenant, by the way. I think there is a lot to think about, and that is why it has become a bit of the Wild West with rent to rent, because I think there are so many elements that can be misused, misunderstood, evaded, all of the above.
Yeah, I think what we were saying is that it's actually quite a complicated business model. And I'm not surprised, really, because you're sat in the middle of multiple parties, and you are taking responsibility for things. And I think, listening to what you've just said, perhaps that's what I'm thinking is perhaps the difference between a traditional letting agent providing guaranteed rent and a proper rent-to-rent business, as much as the rent-to-rent business is taking on a lot more responsibility. Whereas in the letting agent model, you're saying, yep, we'll give you the guaranteed rent. We guarantee we will fill the property, basically, so we can receive the rent and pay it out perhaps in advance and things like that. But, when the tap breaks, we're still going to phone you up and say, you've got to get a plumber in to sort this out. Whereas in the rent-to-rent model, you're taking away all of that stress from the homeowner because you are taking responsibility for it. So yes, if something major happens, or the roof falls in or something, you're inevitably going to have to go back to the homeowner. But for those little everyday bits and bobs, broken tap or a leaky washer or whatever, you handle those. You take those on. And as you said, you've got an allowance for maintenance within your financial structure for the deals that you put together. And you can, as you say, take the stress away from the homeowner. And in the story you were just talking about, that person who has a property, they've had bad experiences in the past, and as you were saying, they're just coming to the end of a very bad experience and still trying to sort out the mess from it. And you can come in and provide a service without any future stress, assuming it's done correctly. And this, I think, is it's a real challenge for homeowners in this situation who want to keep their property, who want to move forwards with it, but without the stress or the concern, because they're busy in other areas of life and whatever else, is choosing the right service, the right business to provide that for them. Because there are lots of different options, lots of different models, and even under this rent-to-rent banner, there's lots of different approaches and levels of service. And some of the people won't provide the level that sort of your business does. I think sort of a good indication of that is some of the stuff that you were saying and sort of trying to help this homeowner with, just as you were going around the viewing. And I know you don't want to go into too much detail, but I think it would be good for listeners to hear a little bit more of that story of what you were seeing as you went around this property, and also what you were talking to the homeowner about. You willing to fill people in a bit more, Stuart?
Yeah, essentially the property had been used for caring, I think. So it had been given on a commercial lease previously for a number of years, and it just got drawn to the homeowner's attention by neighbours that there were things happening at the property that shouldn't have been, particularly in a care environment. There were a number of animals at the property. There were people just sat outside smoking, right by the doorway. And yeah, in summary, there was, excrement, embedded into carpets. There were, mattresses that hadn't been cleaned. So, would be a bad situation in any rental property, let alone one that was designed for caring for people. And needless to say, once the council got hold of it, that operation got closed down very quickly, but left the homeowner in a bit of a situation, because, as you can imagine, the person that was supposed to be running the property has not reacted too well to it, has left numerous bills and that kind of thing. So there's essentially it's just a big problem, and a problem to be sorted. And you can see that because the homeowners owned it for a number of years, that there's a big emotional drain on that. And that's where I think our model can come into its own. And what's good for me is that I can now point to my existing landlords and landladies and say, look, here's all the numbers of the people I work with, as in that are my clients, and just you can phone them, ask them what my service is like and how it's worked, if they're happy, that kind of thing. And obviously that adds credibility to it. But the word you use, which I think is one that's always on my mind, is responsibility. And you've talked about that from a number of degrees. But for me, as I think there should be for anyone in business, possibly life, that we have an amount of responsibility if we're offering something to deliver on that. Now, we will make mistakes, as I've already shared today. Mistakes do happen, but if we are responsible, that we take ownership. If we've offered a service, then we have to be responsible for delivering on that, both to homeowners, tenants, compliance. These are all responsibilities. And I think what you and I have sort of talked about essentially, and where we got to, which is what we've shared already, which is these fraudsters seem to be attracted to the likes of property, particularly in wealth creation circles, because it's easy to talk about big numbers. And when we can talk about rent to rent and how easy it is and how simple it is to make huge amounts of money, that's why they're attracted, because people think it can be true. If it, and I imagine the same. It's the same with crypto, because we can start talking about how wealthy you can be in 24 hours with crypto. There's going to be people out there selling things that just can't possibly be true. But we have to be able to, we have to look under the bonnet of that and find out what it is, and that due diligence and that kind of thing. But, for me, it's everything, we do in business is about solving problems. And clearly these fraudsters, all they're doing is creating them, which is the polar opposite of what I think we should be doing.
Yeah, indeed. Yes, let's not mention crypto at the moment. Might lead into a bit of a rant, but my crypto investment is currently still worth less than I paid for it. But anyway, there's one little bit of that story that you've missed out, which I thought was really lovely. And after your viewing, where you've missed this out of the story, but I know you provided some extra help and advice and suggestions for the homeowner, even though you don't know that you're actually going to enter into a rent-to-rent agreement or anything future with them at this moment in time. And afterwards, you got a very nice text back from them, just saying thank you for the help. And I think it's lovely to know that you can actually just help people, and people do appreciate it, even if you're not going into a future business relationship, or you might be, but you don't know yet.
Yeah, I think, and that for me that made it all worthwhile. Is that I just got a text saying thank you. I've now got some hope, and for me that's worth more than any contract or anything. And yeah, as you said, I just wanted to try and help in the end. And if we work together, great. If we don't, fine. But when you see people in distress, hopefully we're all the same. We just want to help solve the problems as best we can. And at worst, it leads to a positive relationship. And if at best, if we're lucky, we get a business partnership.
Indeed, I think it's great for us to be able to show and say that rent to rent can be done well. It can be a good thing, but do look out. There are fraudsters out there picking on rent to rent, picking on other property topics, picking on all sorts of things. Do be careful. Be very careful where you put your money, who you give your properties to, and what you're actually expecting back from that. Do due diligence. Be careful. Ask yourself, is this realistic? Is it sensible? And is it safe? And I think with that, we're out of time, aren't we, Stuart?
It is, and I don't think we could finish it any better than that. As always, please do reach out to us at BIZ of Property, at Biz of Property on Twitter, or thebusinessofproperty.com. Other than that, we'll see you on the next episode.